Hello, and welcome to Module 5 of the Foundation Certificate in Trauma-Informed Practice with Children and Families, an online certificate offered by the University of Vermont's Child Welfare Training Partnership. This module focuses on the 12 core concepts of trauma-informed practice. It is an interactive training module that was created by students at the University of Vermont's Graduate School of Social Work as part of a course entitled Promoting Well-Being and Resilience in Children and Youth Through Transformative and Trauma Response Practice. The 12 core concepts were developed by the National Child Traumatic Stress Network's Core Curriculum on Childhood Trauma Task Force. Introduction. The following presentation is designed to familiarize you with the 12 core concepts of understanding traumatic stress responses in children and families. This presentation includes audio narration, pictures, and case examples to highlight the core concepts. In Part 2 of the module, you will be able to explore these 12 core concepts with an interactive case activity, providing an opportunity to demonstrate how the core concepts are an important part of trauma-informed practice in the child welfare system. By the end of this module, participants will be able to understand the 12 core concepts of understanding traumatic stress responses in children and families, identify the complex ways in which trauma can affect children, and apply the core concepts to case examples. So let's get started. Concept 1. Trauma experiences are complex. Every traumatic event is made up of different traumatic moments. These moments include varying degrees of perceived threat, physical violation, or witnessing of another's hurt. This means that children can react to different parts of their trauma. These traumatic moments, which are part of the event, will affect each child differently. The nature of a child's reactions are influenced by their prior experiences, including past trauma, developmental level, which may differ from their age, and their relationship to the person inflicting the trauma. The complexity of a child's reaction increases with multiple or recurring traumas. Trauma-exposed children may react with a wide variety of thoughts, feelings, and physical symptoms. Trauma can cause feelings of terror, helplessness, and confusion. During the traumatic event, children may think that they are going to be badly hurt or to die. They may experience shock and a sense that what's happening does not seem real. Physical reactions such as increased heart rate and/or stomach ache are common. Children's own actions or inaction during the trauma may lead to feelings of confusion, guilt, anger, or numbness. Concept 2. Trauma occurs within a broad context that includes children's personal characteristics, life experiences, and current circumstances. Children's reactions to trauma are impacted by a variety of intrinsic and extrinsic factors. These factors impact how the child understands the experience and responds and may act as a protective or vulnerability factors in the child's adjustment to trauma. Intrinsic factors are personally based and include temperament, prior experiences, including past trauma, and any history of psychotherapy. Extrinsic factors are environmentally based and include physical, familial, community, and/or cultural context. For example, a child's reaction will be greatly impacted by the reaction of his or her caregivers and the availability of support in the immediate aftermath of the traumatic event. Remember that context counts. There are numerous aspects within a child's life that will affect how they experience and process traumatic experiences. Concept 3. Traumatic events often generate secondary adversities, life changes, and distressing reminders in children's daily lives. Trauma reminders include people, places, things, or any stimuli that reminds the child of the traumatic event. When reminded of the trauma, children may feel as if they are reliving the event and often re-experience the same feelings of terror and helplessness that they felt during the actual trauma. These reminders may cause exaggerated emotional and behavioral responses that impact the child's functioning. Helping children identify what is reminding them of their trauma experience can provide them with more emotional safety in the future. Traumatic events may be compounded when they lead to loss, financial hardship, changes across the child's environment, home, school, peer relationships, or family disruptions. These secondary adversities overwhelm a child's coping skills, impacting emotional and behavioral functioning and impending adjustment and recovery. For example, A child who is removed from his biological family due to maltreatment may be placed with unfamiliar foster parents and may have to change schools as well. Loss of parents, siblings, and all things familiar can make it much harder for a child to recover from trauma. Concept 4. Children can exhibit a wide range of emotions and reactions to trauma and loss. A child's reaction to traumatic events and loss may vary in onset, presentation, intensity, frequency, and duration. Many children continue to experience trauma reactions long after the event is over. These trauma responses may disrupt various domains of the child's life, including his or her relationships, emotional regulation, and success at school, at home, and in the community. A child with a pre-existing propensity towards anxiety or depression may experience these symptoms more intensely following a traumatic event. Post-traumatic stress and grief may develop over time into psychiatric disorders, including post-traumatic stress disorder, while some children recover or bounce back without lasting psychological distress. It is important for providers to be mindful of the range of possible reactions to trauma and loss. Case example 1. The following slides take you through a hypothetical case example that highlights how trauma may manifest in a child. The following case takes place in a hospital emergency room and represents actions and steps taken from a medical social worker perspective. Use the information that you have learned from the first 4 concepts to think about what may be happening with this child and family. This case occurs in Montpelier, Vermont, and involves Jackson, who is 15 years old. Jackson is evaluated in the emergency room, where he presents with suicidal ideation, depression, and altered mental status. When Jackson was 6, his mother died from ALS. Shortly after, his older brother Kevin, Kevin's wife, and their son moved into the family home. The older brother murdered his toddler son and accused Jackson of the murder. Jackson confessed to a police investigator that he thought he had killed his nephew because he once hit him with a toy. Despite Jackson's confession, his brother was convicted of the murder and is currently serving a 25-year sentence. His sister, whom he was close to and trusted, moved out of the home. He has no other siblings. Jackson's father, Christopher, did not believe in talking about his problems. He thought that Jackson would forget about these events or did not really understand what happened because of his young age. Christopher thought he had a good relationship with his son because they spent a lot of time together fixing cars and fishing and hunting, and did not believe that his son needed professional help to recover from any potential trauma. Until last year, Jackson had performed well in school, and teachers described him as a good student who was attentive and had many friends. Then, his father moved them from their small hometown in New Mexico to Burlington, Vermont because of a job offer. When Jackson entered high school, he began feeling overwhelmed with larger classes and hallways constantly packed with students. He tried to keep up in class, but missed notes and assignment directions. After a couple of months, he had fallen so far behind that he became overwhelmed every time he tried to sit down and catch up. Jackson could not stand his teachers because he felt they were constantly harping on him about missing assignments and low grades. When confronted, he would make nasty remarks under his breath and began to snap back with inappropriate language. He would rather go sit in detention than listen to their rhetoric. Jackson did not really make new friends after the move or entering 9th grade in his new school. Over the past few months, Christopher had become concerned about Jackson's escalating behavior problems and low mood. According to his father, Jackson had been getting in trouble at school and was sent to the principal's office twice over the past month. In addition, Jackson had always been an A or B student and is currently failing most of his classes. He seems unhappy and isolates himself when at home and becomes confrontational when his father tries to interject in his life. At home, Jackson became more and more irritable and withdrawn and never seemed to sleep well. He would wake up through the night and found it harder and harder to get out of bed in the morning. His father would just let him walk to school late or skip the day completely. Jackson thought about getting an after-school job, but his father would not let him because of his low grades. Do you see any of the core concepts of trauma impacting Jackson in this family background section? Now that we have an initial understanding of Jackson's family background, let's look at what is happening with the family now. Jackson is admitted to the ER after his father could not wake him up for school and found an empty pill bottle on his nightstand. The doctors had his stomach pumped, took blood tests, and made a referral to psychiatry and social work to meet with his father. When questioned by the ER nurse and the psychology resident, Jackson reported difficulty sleeping, decreased energy, irritable mood, and trouble with his appetite. He also reported significant feelings of worthlessness, helplessness, hopelessness, and obsession with death. He claims to have taken a bottle of sleeping pills because he just wanted to make it all go away, and he felt better when he was asleep. Jackson was put on constant observation by the emergency room doctor because of his alleged suicide attempt. The ER social worker met with Christopher alone and then with Jackson. She was updated on their family history, the recent move, and the changes in Jackson's behavior. Jackson was discharged to home with an antidepressive medication. Follow-up with this family includes referrals to outpatient mental health counseling for Jackson, connecting the family with a local primary care provider, parent-teacher meeting to discuss how Jackson can get caught up in school, connecting Jackson with the school social worker, and exploring after-school activities for Jackson to make connections with other students and kids his age. Now that you have read the case scenario, do you see any of the first 4 core concepts of trauma impacting Jackson? Take a moment to write them down. Concepts. Core Concept 1. Traumatic experiences are inherently complex. For example, Jackson has experienced the death of his mother, the traumatic loss of his nephew, the trauma of being accused of murder, the loss of his brother and sister, and the loss of his friends and school when he moved to a different state. Core Concept 2. Trauma occurs within a broad context that includes children's personal characteristics, life experiences, and current circumstances. Although it's been 9 years since he lost his mother and nephew, he has never processed the trauma and losses, and the family has coped by avoiding. Core Concept 3. Traumatic events often generate secondary adversities, life changes, and distressing reminders in children's daily lives. The loss of Jackson's mom, and then his brother and sister, led to changes in the family constellation and family roles. When Jackson and his father moved across the country, Jackson lost his school and friends and home. He is likely to experience trauma and loss reminders when other kids talk about their moms or their brothers or nephews, or when he sees a child that resembles his nephew who was killed. Core Concept 4. Children can exhibit a wide range of reactions to trauma and loss. Jackson expresses loss of appetite, irritability, sleeplessness, and hopelessness. He has been acting out in school and not getting out of bed and attempted to take his life by ingesting pills. Okay, let's go see what other core concepts are out there. Concept 5. Danger and safety are core concerns in the lives of traumatized children. Traumatic experiences can impair a child's sense of being protected and safe. Children can still feel like they are in danger, even once they are in safe environments. When children experience trauma, it becomes difficult for them to distinguish between safe and unsafe situations. As a result, changes may occur in their own protective and risk-taking behaviors. For example, some children are hypervigilant to any sign of potential threat and have a hard time ever feeling safe. Other children become so desensitized to dangerous environments that they fail to see signs of threat and therefore may not take appropriate steps to protect themselves. For children who live in dangerous communities or family situations, it may be more difficult to recover from a traumatic experience. For example, children who live in violent communities may experience trauma triggers such as hearing gunshots on a regular basis, which makes it harder for them to feel safe and recover from past traumas. Children living in violent homes may be triggered by any sign of an argument or raised voices. Concept 6. Traumatic experiences affect the family and broader caregiving systems. Traumatic experiences can impact caregiving systems, including schools, childcare, biological, and foster families. This can lead to challenges in the attachment relationships between the child and caregiver within these systems. The stress that a caregiver may experience can impair his or her ability to support the child, which disrupts the child's sense of security and safety. It is important that the caregivers are informed about trauma and its impact, as well as appropriate interventions that support children and families who have experienced trauma. A helpful way to remember Concept 6 is to think of the song We Are Family by Sister Sledge. Think about Concept 6 and everyone that is involved in the caregiving team. We are family. I've got my mother, brother, caregiver, teacher, social worker with me. We are family. Concept 7. Protective and promotive factors can reduce the adverse impact of trauma. Protective factors buffer the adverse effects of trauma and its stressful aftermath, whereas promotive factors enhance children's positive adjustment regardless of whether risk factors are present. Both protective and promotive factors may include child intrinsic factors, which include a child's strengths, coping skills, and self-esteem. They may also include child extrinsic factors, which include positive attachments with a caregiver and a strong support system in school and/or in the community. The presence of and the number of both promotive and protective factors can help a child to resist or recover from the harmful effects of trauma. Concept 8. Trauma and post-trauma adversities can strongly influence development. Traumatic experiences can profoundly influence children's acquisition of developmental competencies and their capacity to reach developmental milestones in domains like cognitive functioning, emotional regulation, and interpersonal relationships. Trauma exposure can lead to regressive behaviors such as bedwetting, or alternatively may lead to developmental accelerations such as leaving home at an early age or engaging in sexual behavior when not emotionally or physically ready. Both immediate and long-term development can be impacted by these experiences. Concept 9. Developmental neurobiology underlies children's reaction to traumatic experience. Our brain structure is designed to help us respond to danger for survival purposes. Exposure to chronic trauma or multiple dangerous situations can therefore have strong biological consequences. Traumatic experiences trigger physiological changes within a child's brain. Many factors influence the details of the physiological changes, including the developmental stage of the child when the trauma occurs, as well as, but not limited to, the extent of the trauma exposure. Exposure to multiple or ongoing traumatic experiences may put a child at a greater risk of neurobiological changes, as the brain operates in primitive functioning, seeking safety and protection from the trauma and future triggers of the trauma. When children's brains are continually in survival mode, the prefrontal cortex is impacted. This often leads to impairments in cognition, decision-making, and planning, which are the executive functions that the prefrontal cortex controls. This image shows how trauma can affect brain growth and development. The image of the prefrontal cortex on the right is from a 3-year-old who suffered from extreme neglect, and you can see that it is much smaller compared to normal. Not every child who experiences trauma will be impacted so severely, but many trauma-exposed children do experience difficulty accessing higher-level brain functions when stressed. While traumatic experiences can result in a vast range of neurobiological changes within a child, neurobiological maturation and the neuroplasticity offer ongoing opportunities for adaptive development and recovery to occur. The brain is always changing and adapting to the environment. So repeated positive experiences, such as supportive and responsive caregiving, create strengthened neural connections in a corrective manner. Concept 10. Culture is closely interwoven with traumatic experiences, response, and recovery. Culture can influence how children, caregivers, and families define what constitutes a traumatic event, as well as how they respond to a traumatic event. Differences in culture can include definition of how trauma is experienced and expressed, rituals and methods of grief and mourning, what personal information is disclosed to others, and how that is communicated. Culture affects how families seek help and how they respond to support and services. The historical and multi-generational trauma a cultural group has experienced may impact how that group responds to trauma and loss at both an individual and group level. For example, the legacy of slavery and atrocities committed against Native American tribes can impact future generations, and new traumas, such as the removal of a child from his or her family by law enforcement or child welfare authorities, can trigger past traumas of family separation and forced boarding school placement. Concept 11. Challenges to the social contract affect trauma response and recovery. Too often, trauma experienced by children is inflicted on them by an important figure in their life. These life figures may include, but are not limited to, family members, teachers, peers, adult mentors, and agents of school institutions such as police officers. This results in a major violation of the expectations of the child, family, community, and society regarding primary social roles and the responsibilities of influential figures in children's lives. Children may have a very difficult time trusting others, especially adults in a position of authority, if they've been hurt or let down by adults in the past. This is particularly true for children who are maltreated by their parents at an early age, as this impairs the child's ability to form and maintain secure attachment relationships. Challenges to the social contract also include legal and ethical issues. These too can affect trauma response and recovery. After a child has experienced trauma, the child and family may begin dealing with issues involving justice, the legal system, and seeking protection from further harm. Even young children can be aware of whether or not justice was served in a manner that promotes their safety and well-being. A child's perception of whether an institutional response has succeeded or failed can greatly influence their post-trauma adjustment. This can also influence a child's evolving beliefs, attitudes, and values. Concept 12. Working with trauma-exposed children can evoke distress in providers that makes it more difficult to provide quality care. When confronting details of children's traumatic experiences, providers must face many challenges that arise for them personally and professionally. This may occur in a manner that triggers a provider's own personal experiences of trauma and loss-related life events, but it is not only providers who have personally experienced trauma who may experience feelings of distress. Working with children, families, and systems entrenched in trauma and loss can create challenges for any provider, including secondary traumatic stress reactions, such as irritability and avoidance. Secondary trauma may make it difficult for a provider to be able to offer quality care. Self-care, which can look very different for different people, is an important component to having the capacity to provide children, caregivers, and families with support. Providers must take care of themselves in order to be available to care for others. Additional information on secondary traumatic stress can be found in Module 7, which focuses on understanding secondary traumatic reactions and strategies for addressing secondary traumatic stress. Case Example 2. The following slides take you through a second hypothetical case example. Now that you have reviewed all 12 core concepts, use the information that you have learned to think about what may be happening with this child and family. The following case takes place in a school and represents the actions and steps taken from a school social work perspective. This case occurs in Essex, Vermont, and involves James, who is in the 4th grade. James and his family are Vermont natives, but have moved several times over the last few years, including out of state. The family has settled into Essex, and Mom reports hoping to stay for some time in order to help James. Mom is currently in a 4-year relationship with her partner. Mom, her partner, and the 4 children live in a 3-bedroom house in Essex. Mom and her partner work full-time jobs while the children are in school. Mom and family are currently receiving Section 8 and other financial supports from the state of Vermont to support the family with housing, heat, and food. Mom reports that, Even though the family is in the safest and most stable home that they have ever been in, James continues to feel unsafe. Mom says that at home, James has created a tent to live in under his bed, and she is seeing similar behavioral challenges at school. Mom is actively engaged with the school team and has been willing to follow team recommendations to support James in school. James's school history. James has transitioned between several schools over the course of the last 4 grades, which Mom reports has only made his problems worsen. Mom reports that James was abused by his biological father when he was 2 years old, and since then, she reports he has had a lot of problems including violent behaviors, suicidal ideations, and major struggles with academics. Referral to counseling. James was referred to a school-based social worker from his school teacher. The referral states the need for services are related to increasing home-to-school communication, concerns about violent behaviors James is exhibiting while in school, low self-efficacy and self-esteem, concerns for child academic development, and reported need for a psychiatric referral. James's school team reports that at previous schools, James was diagnosed with ADHD, anxiety, PTSD, and depression. James is currently taking medications that the team reports may not be appropriate given his current behavioral needs. James's most recent evaluation was by the school psychologist for special education accommodations. The results have shown that James has significantly lower IQ than other children his age. This assessment, along with recommendations from James's team, has allowed James to transition into an alternative classroom. The alternative classroom is to help children struggling with emotional and behavioral issues receive individualized support with academics. The school team is asking for a referral from the school social worker to psychiatry, which could offer new information around accurate diagnoses and treatment for James, as he has received conflicting diagnosis and treatment recommendations from various schools and professionals. Next steps. The school social worker will begin to engage with Mom and the school team to collect more information on James, his family, and their needs. The school social worker will begin to meet individually with James to begin building rapport. Once agreed upon, the school social worker will begin collecting data, reports, and information to make a referral to a psychiatrist for accurate diagnosis and treatment for James. The school social worker will also support home-to-school communication and monitor family needs and support if necessary. What core concepts are represented in this scenario? Take a second to write them down. Concepts. Core Concept 3. Traumatic events often generate secondary adversities and distressing reminders in children's daily lives. Examples include the unstable home situation and financial challenges which have caused additional stress for James and his family. Core Concept 4. Children can exhibit a wide range of reactions to trauma and loss. James feels unsafe. He exhibits violent behavior and suicidal ideation. He is currently having trouble in school and exhibits low self-esteem. Core Concept 5. Danger and safety are core concerns in the lives of traumatized children. James still feels unsafe at home, as evidenced by his need to build a protective tent under his bed. Core Concept 8. Trauma and post-trauma adversities can strongly influence development. James struggles with academics and has a below-average IQ. You have finished learning about the 12 core concepts for understanding traumatic stress responses in children and families. Thank you so much for engaging in this exploration of the concepts, and we hope this enriches your practice. Please continue on to Part 2, the interactive case activity, to further explore these 12 core concepts with a child welfare scenario.